Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the shadows breathe life into the stories you thought you knew. Tonight, we begin our chilling journey into the tale of Sleeping Beauty, reborn in nightmares and woven from thorns. The castle of Aveline sat perched on the edge of the briarwood, half consumed by the creeping forest that groaned with memory. It had been erected centuries ago atop a sacred hill where druids once whispered to the roots and winds. Now, those whispers had turned to screams beneath the foundation stones, though none who lived within the gilded halls dared speak of them. King Alderic and Queen Seraphine ruled over this brooding kingdom, bound more by ambition than love. Seraphine, barren for the better part of their reign, had long endured whispers and rumours that her womb had been cursed. Midwives withered under her cold gaze. Prayers rotted unanswered in the cathedral's rafters. Offerings were made in secret to altars both holy and not. Then, on the first frost of winter, she bled the thorns from her palms into a bowl of black milk and drank it beneath the moon. The next morning, she felt the faint flutter beneath her ribs. Princess Aveline was born under an eclipse. No sun, no warmth, only a long scream and a dark stain on the nursery floor, where the nursemaid's shadow curled and never left. But the court rejoiced, trumpets blared, crows scattered from the high towers, and the queen smiled, a bloodless, weary thing, knowing that the kingdom could now breathe again. A grand celebration was decreed. Nobles and seers came from across the land, bringing gifts of silk, gold, and strange herbs that smoked and hissed when unwrapped. Among the guests were 12 fey godmothers, each as terrible and beautiful as the legends whispered of them. The 13th, of course, had not been invited. In the throne room beneath the great obsidian chandelier, each fae stepped forward in turn to bestow a gift upon the child, who slept in a cradle of pale birch and spider thread linen. "To speak all tongues of the living and the dead," said one. "To heal wounds, even those of the heart," said another. "To command the loyalty of beasts," whispered a third, her voice like frost crawling up a window pane. With each blessing, the room grew heavier. The air turned thick and sweet, as though steeped in honey and rot. As the 12th gift was about to be given, the chamber doors exploded inward with a shriek that shattered every stained glass window along the hall. She appeared in a swirl of crows and dying candlelight, tall veiled, cloaked in a shroud of funeral gauze. No one had seen her enter, no one spoke her name, not even the other fae, the 13th. She was older than stone, older than time, a fae who had once ruled the wild places before the kingdoms cut them down. Her eyes were embers behind her veil, and when she walked, the floor moaned beneath her feet. She didn't bow. "Am I not welcome?" she asked, though her voice carried no anger, only a slow, dreadful curiosity. The queen stood pale and trembling. We had only 12 golden plates, only 12 seats carved of silver leaf. It was no insult. Then allow me to offer a gift regardless." The fae stepped to the cradle, and all the light in the hall died, except the dim, cold shimmer of the chandelier above. The baby stirred, and for a breath opened her eyes. They were the colour of old ash. On her 16th birthday, the princess shall prick her finger on a spindle and die. There was a silence so deep it carved hollows in the soul. But the 12th fae stepped forward, She had not yet given her gift. "Let it not be death," she whispered. "Let it be sleep, sleep as deep as burial, sleep without end, until love, pure and true, breaks the curse." The 13th Fae gave a smile, thin as spider silk. "Let us see," she said, and vanished into the floor like smoke swallowed by the earth. From that day forward, no spinning wheels were allowed within the castle walls. Every spindle was broken, every loom burned. The kingdom's weavers grew desperate, cloth became rare, wool unravelled in the fields. Yet no price was too great to shield the child from her fate. Aveline grew in silence. She did not speak, not until her 7th year. Her first word was not mother or father, but listen. She said it in the garden one morning, head tilted, as if someone spoke to her from beneath the soil. She plucked the heads off roses and whispered to them. Birds dropped dead in her presence. Cats followed her, wide-eyed, and screamed in their sleep. By 12, she no longer played with dolls, but stitched them shut and buried them in the orchard. Her governess vanished one day, leaving behind only a pair of slippers soaked in dew and teeth. The king and queen feared her, though they would never say it aloud. But they loved her in the way one might love a viper kept behind glass. She was beautiful, wild-eyed, pallid, with hair like night water and lips tinged violet. She sang in languages that made the fires crackle oddly, and always she was drawn to the dark corners of the castle where no one dared go. Then, in the days before her 16th birthday, Aveline began to dream. She dreamed of a tower buried in roses, and of a wheel spinning endlessly in a room with no door. She dreamed of a woman with no face, cradling a thorn as though it were a child. She dreamed of an orchard that bled when the wind blew. And when she woke, she whispered, "Soon." No one noticed the blood that began to seep from beneath the castle floorboards. No one questioned why the moon refused to rise some nights. No one heard the spinning, the faint whir 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 from the topmost tower, the one everyone had forgotten how to reach. But Aveline knew the way, and on the morning of her 16th birthday, she rose without being called, dressed in a gown that had not been laid out for her, and walked barefoot through corridors no longer marked on any map. The castle did not stir. It held its breath, because somewhere, far below the foundations, the 13th Fae had begun to smile. The light in the castle changed the moment Aveline stepped out of her chamber. No sun poured through the windows, though the hour should have been bright with morning. Instead, a strange pall had settled over the stone, thick and dim, as though the entire palace were submerged beneath lake water. The tapestries fluttered slightly, though there was no breeze, and somewhere far below, the groaning of the earth was louder now, like a thing long buried trying to rise. Aveline's bare feet made no sound as she walked, her nightgown trailing across the ancient flagstones. She passed servants who didn't move, statues with eyes that glistened, mirrors that rippled when she crossed before them. The silence in the halls was not peace, it was pressure, like the castle itself was holding something in. She did not look behind her. She did not need to. The way was known. She passed through a forgotten corridor, one sealed generations ago, behind a crumbling tapestry of a lion devouring a stag. The cloth parted at her approach, like a curtain of reeds. The dust that choked the air stirred, recognizing the presence of old blood. Each step was a note in an unwritten song. Stone gave way to spiral stair, the kind built not for convenience, but to disorient. The kind meant to be hidden, felt more than seen. The climb was endless, air thinning, the walls narrowing, until even her slender shoulders brushed the sides. Still she rose until she reached the black door. It was not made of wood or iron. It was made of woven hair, wound tightly and bound with thorn vines, so old they had petrified into bone. There was no handle, only a whisper, one that had followed her in dreams since she first learned to close her eyes. Come. Aveline touched the door, and it dissolved beneath her fingertips. Inside, the room was not large. The ceiling sloped to a point, and there were no windows, yet the space shimmered with a soft, unnatural glow, like moonlight trapped in amber, and in the centre sat the spinning wheel. It was ancient, but untouched by time, carved from a single piece of black yew. Its surface pulsed faintly as though it lived. The spindle gleamed like the tip of a needle kissed with venom. Spiderwebs trembled in the corners of the room, and the scent of lavender, decayed and sweet, clung to the air like a lullaby long forgotten. Aveline approached. Her breath slowed. The wheel began to spin. She didn't scream. She didn't falter. Her eyes glazed, but she smiled, ever so slightly, as her finger reached forward, almost eager. The tip touched the spindle, and for the briefest moment, the wheel shuddered, as if it too had been waiting for this touch across centuries. A single drop of blood bloomed at her fingertip. It fell, slow and heavy, landing on the floor with a hiss, and then she collapsed. Not with violence, but with grace, like a petal folding in the wind. Her body crumpled, eyes closed, lips parted, as though whispering the last word of a forgotten prayer. Sleep took her like a velvet wave. Not peace, but a stillness too complete to be life. From the shadows behind the spinning wheel, something stirred. A woman stepped forward, not the 13th Fae, not quite, for this form was not the towering, veiled figure of the curse-bringer, but something new. She wore Aveline's face, but older, crueler, hollowed, as if the girl had slept just long enough to rot, and awoken with her soul on the outside. The thing in her shape knelt beside the real Aveline's sleeping form and smiled. Then she vanished. Elsewhere in the castle, time stopped. The cook, stirring a pot of broth, fell face first into the stew. The boy, polishing a candlestick, slumped mid-motion, breath softening to silence. Guards collapsed at their posts. Doves sleeping in the rafters turned to stone. The king, in the middle of a meeting, froze with his hand outstretched, his mouth open in a silent command. Only the queen moved. Seraphine sat alone in her private garden, whispering to a flower that hadn't bloomed in 20 years. She'd known the moment it happened. Her heart, deadened for years by fear and prophecy, felt it stir like a final beat. The curse had found its root. She rose and walked. No panic, no hesitation. Her footsteps echoed as if the castle knew she was awake when none should be. The deeper she walked, the more the halls changed. Paintings wept red, candles melted up instead of down. A low thrum echoed in the stones, like drums beating beneath the floors. She reached the base of the tower, but the door was gone. Just blank wall, Seraphine laid her palm flat against it. "I see you," she said. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the wall shivered, cracks spread like veins, and the stone dissolved into ash. She stepped into the stairwell. She climbed. At the top, she found her daughter, limp and pale as bone, the spindle still wet with blood. She did not weep. She sat beside Aveline and placed a hand over her daughter's heart, still beating but distant, still dreaming but not alone, because now something else breathed beneath her skin, a shadow. The queen stood and turned her gaze to the spinning wheel, and then she did something no one expected. She sat down, her hands gripped the wheel, and she began to spin. The fibres she fed into the thread were from her own sleeve, from her own skin. She bled and fed and wove and sang, and with every turn she pulled something from herself, memories, regrets, names of people she'd forgotten. She spun until her fingers went numb, until the wheel smoked and hissed, until her breath came in shallow rasps, because the 13th Fae had not cursed the daughter alone. The queen had made a pact that night, beneath the moon, when she drank the black milk. One life for another, and the Fae always collect. Suddenly the wheel shattered. A sound like a scream echoed from within it. Not hers, not Aveline's, but something older, deeper, trapped in the threads Seraphine had just broken. The light in the room extinguished, and in the dark, the queen vanished. Far away, the briarwood began to grow. It surged from the earth like a wound opening wide, thorned and ravenous. Trees twisted into unnatural shapes, bark screaming as branches snapped outward. Brambles as thick as a man's arm erupted from the soil, forming a wall around the castle, impenetrable and sentient. The kingdom watched in horror as the forest devoured the palace, and then silence fell, eternal and complete. None who tried to enter ever returned. None who remained within ever stirred. And in the high tower, the girl who slept did not age, but in her dreams, something whispered to her, a voice that had her face, but none of her soul, a voice that said, "You are mine now, we sleep together." And Aveline dreamed of teeth behind roses 100 years past. Time grew thin around the castle, as though it avoided the place, ashamed to linger. Seasons changed beyond the briars, but the trees that had taken root around the palace never shed their leaves. They grew gnarled and slick with rot, hungry for light, but swaddled in shadow. Birds avoided the sky above. Wolves did not tread the borders. Even wind refused to enter. The kingdom that once looked to Valorum for guidance turned its gaze away. Maps faded, roads twisted. The castle became a myth, then a warning. Children were told not to stray too far into the woods, lest they be tangled in vines that whispered their name and drank the warmth from their skin. But still, legends grew. It was said that a girl slept in the tallest tower, more beautiful than moonlight, with hair that grew like ivy and a soul that pulsed with power. It was said her dreams could shape the world if one could only reach her. It was said that whoever kissed her would inherit her gifts or her curse, but few who believed had the courage to try, and of those few, none survived Yet legends like curses attract the desperate, and one such soul was making her way through the forest, blade in hand and purpose burning behind her eyes. Her name was Lysandra. She was not a prince. She was not even nobility, a sellsword by trade, a gravedigger's daughter by birth. But there was something in her blood, a lineage that smelled faintly of rust and roses, of something older than her name. Her dreams had been haunted since childhood by images she could not explain, a tower lost in vines, a wheel that bled, a girl made of night water and ash. When she woke, her hands always bore faint scratches, as though the thorns in her dreams had followed her back. So she sought the castle. It took her years to find it. The forest resisted her. She fought brambles that slithered, trees that bled sap thick as tar. She crossed rivers that whispered secrets, and marshes that clutched at her ankles like forgotten hands. Her sword dulled, her strength waned, but she pressed on. Something was calling her. Something was waiting. By the time she reached the wall of thorns, her armour was dented, her skin bruised and tattooed with old scars. The wall rose high above her, twisting and pulsing like a living thing. Thorns as long as daggers curled inward, tipped with red. Flowers bloomed among them, roses black as shadow, petals soft as breath, and all of them turned toward her as she approached. Lysandra did not falter. She raised her sword and cut. The blade hissed through the first layer, and the wall screamed, not in pain, but in recognition. It opened, not willingly, not easily, but it parted, just wide enough to allow her entry, as though the forest itself were curious to see how she would fare. She passed through. Inside, the castle stood frozen in time. Vines crept along its towers like veins on a corpse. Windows blinked slowly, dark eyes in hollow sockets. The once white stone had turned the colour of mildew and bone. But despite the decay, the air pulsed with enchantment, thick enough to taste, sweet and coppery, like sugared blood. Lysandra moved carefully. In the courtyard, she found statues with terrified expressions, frozen moments of agony, of grasping hands and silent screams. But they were no sculptures. They wore the garb of knights, servants, nobles. Their skin had turned to stone, but their eyes still glistened wet. Some wept. She didn't look too long at any face. The halls inside whispered. Her boots echoed on marble slick with moss. Portraits turned to follow her. The chandeliers hung upside down, wrapped in spider webs as thick as rope. And all around, the silence pulsed, watching, breathing, waiting. She followed the path. Her dreams had etched into her bones. Upward, past the banquet hall where mould bloomed on dishes set a century ago. Past the nursery where cradles rocked themselves. Past the queen's chambers where the mirror cracked as she passed and murmured. Too late, she climbed the winding tower stair, each step groaning beneath her. The air thickened. She began to sweat, then shiver. Her breath came fast. The walls whispered things she had only ever heard in nightmares. Her name, her fears, her memories twisted into mockery. But still, she climbed. She reached the top. The door stood waiting, woven from hair and thorn, same as the tales, but this time it opened on its own. Inside was the sleeping girl. Aveline lay upon a bed of woven roots. her limbs curled like a child's, her hair spilling over the edge like liquid dusk. Roses bloomed from her fingertips. Vines had grown into her veins, feeding her sleep. Her eyes fluttered beneath their lids, and her lips moved without sound. Lysandra approached. The air thickened again, sweet, cloying, her vision blurred. And then she heard the other voice, not Aveline's, the other. "You're not what I expected," it said. Lysandra turned. There, in the shadowed corner of the room, stood a second Aveline. No vines touched her. No breath stirred her chest. Her skin shimmered like oil, and her eyes were too deep, too wide. "I've had so many suitors," the thing said, stepping forward. "Knights and fools. I open their dreams like cages and let the darkness inside. But you," it tilted its head, "you smell of ash and grey flowers. You're already half mine." Lysandra raised her sword. The thing laughed. "Oh, brave little lamb," it purred. "Do you think steel matters here?" With a flick of her hand, the vines in the room surged. They lashed at Lysandra, wrapping her limbs, her throat. Her sword fell with a clang. The floor trembled, but Lysandra did not scream. Instead, she bit her tongue and spat blood into the thing's face. The shadow Aveline recoiled, hissing, smoke rising where the blood touched her. Lysandra tore free from the vines and lunged, not with her sword, but with a shard of mirror she'd taken from the Queen's chamber. She drove it into the thing's chest. The room shrieked. The vines went still. The shadow crumpled, thrashing, and then began to unravel like cloth soaked in acid. Lysandra turned to the real Aveline, heart pounding. She knelt. Her fingers brushed the girl's cheek. "Wake up," she whispered. Aveline stirred. Her eyes opened, grey, fathomless, but not empty, not cursed. They met Lysandra's. She whispered one word, "Listen," and the castle exhaled. When Aveline opened her eyes, it was not like waking. It was like being dragged. Her soul surfaced through layers of silk and shadow, pulled upward by invisible hands. The voice that had echoed in her dreams for years, the one that whispered lullabies through gritted teeth, was gone. Its absence rang louder than its presence ever had, and in its place was another sound. Breathing, not hers. The castle was breathing. She sat up slowly. The vines that had once fed on her magic shriveled and turned to ash. Her skin, pale and untouched by sunlight for a century, pulsed faintly with life. Her hair spilled across the bed in knots of shadow, and when she blinked, her lashes left faint marks in the air, as though the very atmosphere remembered the weight of her sleep. Lysandra stepped back, her breath ragged from battle. The mirror shard still bloodied in her hand. Aveline turned to her. "Where did you come from?" she asked, voice soft but not weak. She sounded like someone remembering how to speak after a long illness. "I followed a dream," Lysandra said. "Or maybe it followed me." Aveline rose to her feet. The air coiled around her ankles like smoke. She reached down, touched the place where the false self had stood, and felt the stone burn cold beneath her palm. "She's not dead," she whispered. "I stabbed her," Lysandra replied. Aveline looked up. "You scattered her. There's a difference." Outside the tower, the castle began to move. Not physically, but spiritually, the silence that had filled its lungs for a century exhaled in a slow, mournful gust. Windows shattered in distant wings. Doors creaked open where no hinges remained. The stone itself groaned, shifting as though trying to remember its shape. Aveline staggered. Lysandra caught her. "Too much," Aveline murmured, clutching her head. "She fed on me too long, too deep. You don't have to fight alone." Aveline's gaze darted to Lysandra's hand, the blood still on her knuckles, the dirt beneath her nails, the life that had clawed its way here inch by inch. "No," Aveline said, "I don't." Together they descended the tower. The stairs hissed under their steps, resentful of the disturbance. The very air seemed to resist them, thickening in their throats, making every breath a labour. On the lower landing, a tapestry fled to life, its woven scene now animated. It showed Aveline as a child, asleep in a cradle ringed by roses that wept blood. Seraphine stood above her, whispering something unheard into the child's ear. Aveline froze. "What is this?" she asked. Lysandra watched the threadwork mouth of Seraphine move. "She made a pact," she said, "before you were born." Aveline touched the tapestry. It turned black where her fingers brushed it, then crumbled to dust. They pressed on, through hallways overgrown with vines that trembled at Aveline's presence, through rooms where time had curdled, the dining hall still laid out for a feast that never happened, the food petrified into twisted shapes that bore teeth. They reached the throne room. The king sat on his throne, unmoving, still caught mid-command, his eyes glazed with a sheen of eternal sleep. Around him, the court stood like statues, some collapsed in mid-collapse, others forever upright, skin like porcelain and just as brittle. And in the centre of the room was the queen, Seraphine. She was not frozen like the others. She stood motionless, but her eyes followed them, no longer human. Her irises were gone, replaced by spirals of thorns. Lysandra reached for her sword. "Wait!" Aveline said. She stepped forward, trembling. "Mother," the queen's lips parted, and from her mouth spilled vines. They wriggled down her chest, across her arms, around her feet, rooting her into the stone. Her fingers twitched, her mouth moved again, and this time a whisper emerged, so faint it might have been memory. "I tried." She gave herself to stop the curse, Aveline murmured, but it wasn't enough. "She became the curse," Lysandra said. Seraphine's body convulsed, her face twisted, not with pain, but with revelation. "Run!" she rasped, just before the vines burst from her back and filled the room with shrieking thorns. The windows exploded. Darkness flooded through the cracks in the walls like smoke with bones, and from it rose her, the 13th, not as a mirror this time, not a false Aveline, but herself, veiled, towering, impossible. The Fae who had watched forests rot and empires fall. "You broke the dream," she said, her voice shaking the bones in their spines. "Now you will wake the rest." Aveline stepped forward. "Why me?" The Fae tilted her head. "Because you were born of hunger. Because you are not a daughter. You are a doorway. I am not yours. Not anymore." The face smiled. The ceiling above them cracked. The castle shook, and the thorns burst through the floor. Lysandra leapt forward, sword drawn. But Aveline raised her hand. "No, this ends with me." She stepped into the vines, and they parted. She walked toward the 13th, heart hammering. The Fae raised a hand, and a spindle appeared between them, dripping blood from its tip. "You can return," she said. "Sleep, forget, be safe." Aveline reached for it, then snapped it in half. The scream that followed was not human. It tore through the castle, through the trees, through the sky. Birds fell from the air. The thorns recoiled. The Fae staggered, her form unraveling. She reached for Aveline with fingers like roots, but Aveline grabbed her wrist and whispered the words she'd spoken as a child. "Listen." And the Fae did, and what she heard was herself, echoed back in fear, in hunger, in failure. She collapsed into dust, and the silence broke. In the throne room, Seraphine fell to her knees, the vines withering from her body. The king slumped forward, gasping. All around, the court began to stir. Time returned gently. Aveline turned. Lysandra waited. The castle, still dark, no longer pulsed with malevolence. It was only stone again, and far outside the briarwood began to die. The castle awoke like a wounded beast, not with a cry, but with a slow ache of joints long locked in place. Dust peeled from paintings. Air flowed through halls sealed for a century. The great clock tower ticked once, then fell silent, not yet ready to mark time again. The enchantments that had once coiled through every stone began to withdraw, leaving behind veins of magic, still glowing faintly, like old scars. But not all the echoes faded. Some remained, and some began to stir. Aveline stood alone in the courtyard. The vines that had once twisted around the gates lay rotting at her feet, brittle as dead snakes. The black roses that had bloomed with such malignant grace had shed their petals, revealing seed pods filled not with seeds, but teeth. The garden she gazed upon was no longer a monument of beauty. It was a battlefield of memory. She knelt before the roots of a tree that had grown twisted through a broken fountain. The water had long dried to salt. Her fingers touched the bark. "You were my cradle," she whispered, "and my cage." Behind her, Lysandra approached, slow and wary. "There's no threat left," she said. "The Fae's gone. You shattered her." "No," Aveline replied, without turning. "I ended a shape, not the thing inside it." Lysandra glanced back toward the castle. "The people are waking. The king remembers nothing. The queen barely speaks. She won't meet my eyes." "She gave too much," Aveline murmured, "more than she meant to. The Fae fed on her regret for years. That doesn't vanish just because the curse is lifted." Lysandra crouched beside her. "So what now?" Aveline looked up at the sky. Clouds moved again. Wind stirred her hair. The sun had not yet dared return, but the light was less grey. "We rebuild," Aveline said, "but not the way it was." "And what about you?" Aveline's mouth curled into a faint smile. "I don't know who I am without the dream. I only know I never want to go back." Lysandra reached into her satchel and withdrew the broken shard of the mirror, the one she'd used to wound the shadow Aveline. She held it out. "This still shows her," she said. "The one you left behind." Aveline hesitated, then took it. The reflection within was warped, Not like a mirror gone bad, but like a memory caught mid-scream. The false Aveline's eyes stared back, wide and hollow, mouth open in a smile too sharp to be kind. "She's not done with me," Aveline whispered. "No," Lysandra agreed, "but you're not done with her either." A wind swept through the courtyard. The broken trees shivered, and somewhere deeper within the castle, something knocked once, soft, polite, like the closing of a lid. The days that followed were unlike any in the kingdom's history. Messengers rode through the land, bearing word that Valoran hadn't perished, but slept. The nobles who returned to court found themselves walking halls unfamiliar. Their old rooms no longer recognised them. The floor plans had shifted. Some doors led where they always had. Others did not. Servants whispered of lights in the west wing that no longer had an entrance. A tapestry in the chapel bled through its seams when touched. And always, above them all, the tower stood, its windows empty, its breath held. Aveline did not return to her former chambers. She made her bed in the garden. There, amid the roots of the warped trees, she dug with her bare hands and found bones. Not human, but close. Creatures that had been used in the making of the spell. Bird things with glass beaks, rodents with too many spines, dolls with veins. She unearthed them, piece by piece, and gave them fire. Lysandra stayed by her side, though she could not explain why. "I was supposed to come here," she said one night, as they lay beneath a sky that never quite remembered how to be night or day. "Before I was born, I think. I dreamed this place before I even knew it existed." "You're tied to it," Aveline said. "I don't want to be." "Neither did I." Lysandra turned to her. "But you stayed." Aveline's face was unreadable in the flickering light of the fire. "Because if I leave, I think she'll wake again." Lysandra sat up. "You mean the 13th? "No, the part of me that believed her." She touched her chest, just above her heart. "She fed on our fears, our regrets, the pieces of ourselves we buried because they hurt too much to look at. And in return, she promised to take the pain away. All I had to do was sleep." Lysandra said nothing. Aveline continued. "There are others like her, not just fae, things that sleep in the folds of dreams, and when they wake, they don't come alone." A hush fell. Somewhere in the ruined orchard, a lullaby began to play, though no one had wound the music box in decades. In the weeks that followed, Aveline began to change. Her skin darkened, not with sun, but with magic. Patterns formed like tattoos, runes along her spine, thornwork at her wrists. Her voice took on an echo, even when whispered. The servants feared her, the court avoided her, but the children followed her like shadows. She spoke to them kindly. She taught them to listen, not just to words, but to the roots, to the walls, to the wind. She walked barefoot always, so she could feel the castle's heartbeat. And one day, she found a door she had never seen before. It was small, made of bone and salt, wedged behind the hearth in the oldest hall. It pulsed when she touched it. It recognized her. Lysandra appeared in the doorway. "You don't have to open it." "I already did." The door swung inward. There was no room beyond, only a stair spiralling downward into dark. From below came breathing, then a voice, not the 13th, not the false self, a new one. You've woken, but we have not. Oh, Aveline turned to Lysandra. I need to go. Lysandra nodded. I'll follow. Aveline smiled. Not the smile of a sleeping girl, not the smile of a cursed child, but the smile of someone who remembered everything and still chose to walk forward. Together they descended. The door closed behind them, and above, in the garden of remnants, the trees bloomed blood-red blossoms that pulsed with light. The stairwell beneath the salt-bone door wound down like the spiral of a shell, tight, endless, and somehow larger than it should have been. The deeper Aveline and Lysandra descended, the less the world above seemed real. The scent of earth faded, the air thickened with the taste of copper and memory. The walls around them bled light, dim pulses that flared whenever Aveline's hand grazed the stone. Neither spoke. It wasn't silence by choice. Speech would have fractured the spell, holding the staircase together. It was made of more than stone. It was made of memory, forgotten dreams, sins wrapped in cobwebs and layered with dust. Every step downwards was a journey backward, deeper into the curse that had never truly ended. After what felt like hours or days, they reached the bottom. The space opened into a chamber that pulsed like the inside of a beast. The ceiling was high and veined, the walls slick with something that shimmered like wet parchment. Strange growths, like fungi but crystalline, bloomed from the floor, and at the centre, rising from the ground like a throne melted halfway into the earth, sat an altar of roots, not crafted, grown. The roots still bled. Something, someone, was buried beneath. Aveline approached slowly. She's still here, she said. Lysandra followed, sword drawn. The 13th? No, Aveline murmured. Me. She knelt and placed her palm on the altar. The roots writhed slightly under her touch. She wasn't a curse, Aveline said softly. She was a mirror. She fed on what I gave her, on what was already inside me. Fear, doubt, the need to hide from everything I didn't want to face. Lysandra frowned. You shattered her. I shattered her reflection. Aveline turned, eyes wide and glowing now, pupils pinprick thin. This is the part I left behind. Lysandra hesitated. Then why come back to it? Because it's not enough to bury something, Aveline said. You have to accept it. She placed both hands on the root altar. It began to split open, not cracked, but peeled like the skin of a fruit. Beneath the bark, a body was curled in fetal position, wrapped in a shroud of thorns and black silk. The face was Aveline's, pale, still, lips slightly parted, not dead, not alive. Lysandra flinched. She looks like me, Aveline said. Before I slept, she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the forehead of her buried self, the chamber convulsed. The walls screamed. From the shadows, things began to emerge. Faces half-formed, bodies stitched from regret. A child made of ash, a queen with her mouth sewn shut, a girl with her wrists bound in rose thorns. All of them Aveline. All of them watched her. You left us, they whispered. You forgot us. You grew without us. Lysandra raised her sword. Get behind me. No, Aveline said, stepping forward. They're not enemies, they're truths. She faced them all. I see you, she said. I remember what you felt, the fear, the shame, the hunger to disappear. The room trembled, the root altar flared with light. I see you, Aveline repeated, and I carry you with me, but you don't control me anymore. The ghostly figures began to fade, one by one. The child of ash turned to dust. The queen bowed her head and stepped back. Only one figure remained, the bound girl, her mouth sown with thorns. Aveline approached. I couldn't hear you before, she said, but I can now. She reached out and carefully plucked the thorns from the girl's lips. The mouth opened, and the girl said in Aveline's voice, "You're ready." Then she too dissolved. The root altar crumbled, and the buried self opened her eyes. They were no longer grey, they were black and full of stars. Aveline stepped into her own body, and for the first time since she had been cursed, she was whole. When she rose again, the chamber was gone. She stood in the castle garden, but it had changed. The trees were taller, their bark silver-veined. Flowers bloomed with petals that whispered when they opened. The sky was night, but filled with stars that moved like flocks of birds. Lysandra stood beside her. "You brought us somewhere else," she said, looking around. "Is this still the castle?" "It's deeper," Aveline replied. "It's what the castle was meant to be." She knelt, dug her fingers into the soil. "It grew around my sleep, around my wound, but now it can grow from truth." Lysandra dropped her sword. "You're something else now." Aveline looked up at her, a smile like eclipse light on her lips. "I'm not Sleeping Beauty anymore," she said. "I'm the Dreamwalker." From the horizon, a howl sounded, not of pain, but invitation. The dream had changed. The curse had not ended. It had evolved, and the one who had once been Aveline turned her eyes to the night, ready to step into the dark once more. This time, awake. The castle did not vanish. It transformed. Where once Valoran stood, a monument of crumbling grandeur, wrapped in shadowed vines, now bloomed a different structure. It pulsed with living stone and silent memory. Towers grew, not upward, but outward, like the branches of a tree shaped by dreams. Windows blinked open, like eyes remembering how to see. The stones beneath the foundation hummed with new runes, carved by roots that reached deep into the old bones of the world. This was no longer a place for kings or courts. It was a place for her, the Dreamwalker. Aveline moved through the transformed castle, as though she had always belonged here, and perhaps she had, just not as the cursed princess asleep in a tower. Now, each step reshaped the path behind her, creating new rooms, shifting old ones, weaving the castle into a living dream that obeyed no map but memory. Lysandra stayed close. She had taken to wearing no armour now, only loose travelling leathers and a dagger at her side. Not because she feared attack, but because weapons were still useful against the things that didn't belong in dreams. And some things had begun to enter. It started with a visitor, a man who stumbled into the garden. With his eyes stitched shut, he collapsed at the roots of the blood blossom tree, muttering names in a language no one had spoken for centuries. He claimed to be from a village that hadn't existed since before the curse. And when Lysandra helped cut the threads from his eyes. He wept bark instead of tears. "He is dreaming," Aveline said, kneeling beside him. "But he's real," Lysandra replied. "His heart beats. His blood smells like iron, not smoke." "They're crossing now," Aveline murmured. "The wall between waking and dreaming has thinned. Because of you, because of her," Aveline whispered, gazing toward the stars above, which now pulsed with unnatural rhythm. The 13th Fae was only one of many. She wasn't the curse. She was a gatekeeper, and the gate she guarded has been opened. Lysandra looked around the garden. More flowers had begun to bloom. Strange things, with petals shaped like faces, and roots that whispered names in the dirt. Trees bore fruit made of glass. Shadows no longer followed the sun, but crawled in reverse, clinging to walls and muttering, "This place isn't safe anymore." It never was. But now it's worse. Aveline stood. "I must prepare." She formed her court that night, not of nobles, not of knights, but of dreamers, those drawn to the castle by visions, by whispers in sleep, by the hunger to understand what had been locked away beneath veil and thorn. Some arrived on foot, others in sleepwalking trances. A child wandered in from a forest where time bent sideways. A crone stepped through a puddle in her hut and found herself standing in the hall of mirrors. A mute woman carried a raven who spoke on her behalf, its eyes older than gods. Aveline welcomed them all. She gave no titles, only names. She asked each to plant a seed of memory in the garden and let it grow as it would. And they did. The garden changed. It became a living archive of dream and wound, beauty and regret. Blossoms unfolded memories, some joyful, some terrible. Trees whispered lullabies of places that never existed. The garden became the heart of the Dreamwalker's court, a sanctuary, a labyrinth, a warning. But not all who arrived came in peace. One night, the stars above turned red. A man stepped from the shadows, clothed in gold thread that unravelled as he walked. His skin shimmered with illusions. His smile was perfect and utterly wrong. "I dreamed of you," he said. Aveline stood beneath the blood blossom tree. "I doubt it," she replied. "You came from outside." He bowed. "I come bearing a gift, one you left unfinished." He held out a spindle. It was carved from bone. The tip dripped ink instead of blood. "Write the dream again," he said. "Let the world sleep once more." Behind him, shapes slithered in the dark. Things wearing crowns of spider legs and robes stitched from the skins of memories. Aveline didn't blink. She raised her hand, and the garden responded. The ground split, roots erupted, wrapping the intruder in silence and thorns. He didn't resist. He only smiled wider as he was dragged beneath the earth. "You'll have to choose, eventually," he whispered. "Are you a gatekeeper or a queen?" Then he was gone. Lysandra found Aveline that night, sitting at the mirror pool. The water no longer showed reflections, only possibilities. "I think they'll keep coming," Aveline said. "They want what you took from the 13th, what I reclaimed." Lysandra crouched beside her. "Do you ever wish you could go back to before any of this?" Aveline stared into the pool. "I remember what it felt like, to be small, to be afraid, But I don't want to be that girl again. I don't want to be asleep, Lysandra. Not even if the dream was beautiful. She looked at her hands, no longer soft or royal, marked with runes, scarred by thorns, stained with soil and blood. I will not let the world sleep again. Not like that. I will walk through the dreams of others. I will guard them, but I will not let them forget. Lysandra smiled. Then we're building something, not just guarding ruins. Yes, Aveline said, we're building a bridge between what we were and what comes next. Above them, the stars flickered. A storm of dreamlight rolled across the sky, and somewhere, far beyond the reaches of the garden, a child stirred in her cradle and whispered the name of the Dreamwalker, though she had never heard it spoken aloud. The garden bloomed with memories, not just Aveline's, but the memories of every dreamer who had come since. They planted grief in soil, joy in thorns, rage in riverbeds. Trees bore the fruits of heartbreak and forgiveness. Paths shifted each night, so no dreamer ever walked the same route twice. There were corners of the garden where time reversed, and others where time simply refused. It had become a sanctuary for those lost in themselves. But Aveline knew sanctuaries attracted predators. She stood at the threshold of a newly bloomed gate near the garden's edge. It had grown overnight, twisted from bone-white birch and coiled silver vine. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and from beyond it came whispers, not dreams, but echoes. Something's watching. Lysandra murmured behind her, sword drawn again, not through the gate, beneath it. Aveline pressed her hand to the gate. A ripple passed through the bark. She's still awake. Lysandra stiffened. The 13th? No, Aveline said. The thing beneath the 13th. The thing that used her. A silence followed, long and cold. Then we didn't break the curse, Lysandra said at last. We only peeled off its skin. Aveline turned. We ended one dream, but dreams are endless. The thing that slumbered beneath the spindle and the tower, it's older than language. It lives where children scream themselves awake, where widows dream of closed doors, where kings lose their names. Lysandra touched the hilt of her blade. Then let's kill it. You can't kill a thing that doesn't live, Aveline said. Only contain it. Or seal it. Aveline nodded. I know how. That night, the Dreamwalker walked alone through the deepest rootways of the garden, past the well of mirrors that showed dreams before they were dreamed, past the orchard where trees grew tongues instead of fruit, to the oldest place, a crater beneath a thorn tree that bore no leaves. The earth here bled ink instead of sap. The air was thin but thick with sound, a constant whispering, like breathing just below the surface. Aveline knelt and pressed both palms to the soil, and she sang. It was not a song of melody, it was a song of memory. She sang her own name and every version of herself she had ever been. She sang the sound of the spindle turning. She sang the night the stars first flickered above her cradle. She sang the scream her mother never let escape, and with each verse the ground split wider, and from it rose the truth, a creature without shape, a hole where meaning should have been. Its eyes were doorways to all the dreams ever feared but never spoken. It opened its mouth, and unvoiced every nightmare that had ever been suppressed. Aveline didn't run. She opened her arms, and it entered her. The Dreamwalker screamed, not in fear, but in effort. She held the thing inside her, folding its edges with her own pain, wrapping it in every wound she'd ever borne, until it shrank, tightened, curled in on itself, and became silent. When Lysandra found her, Aveline knelt in the same place, her hair pale as moonlight, her skin like porcelain split with golden veins. "It's done," Aveline said softly. Lysandra dropped beside her. "What did you do?" "I became the spindle." A hush passed. "I hold the dream now," Aveline said. "The sleeping part, the cursed part. It won't escape unless I let it." Lysandra's throat tightened. "You're cursed again." Aveline smiled. "No, I'm awake. I'm just watching." She stood. The crater was gone. Only a seed remained, pulsing faintly, and in her chest, Aveline carried a dream, so vast it could not be named. A dream of fire that could not burn. A dream of death that watched, but did not take. A dream of a girl who once slept and would never sleep again. In the garden, the blood blossoms bloomed at dawn. Dreamers still arrived, drawn by whispers they couldn't trace. Children laid their nightmares beneath the roots and grew hope from the bones. The world changed slowly, no longer ruled by sleepwalkers or kings, but by those willing to face the dark with their eyes open. And deep within the castle, the Dreamwalker walked alone, not asleep, not cursed, not lost, watching, waiting, and guarding the sleep of the world.